Estribillo cada mañana, antes de que la ciudad se despierte, mi viejo cuerpo se levanta, impulsado por un secreto que pocos creerían jamás. Son las 4:30. Mi desgastado despertador rompe la quietud de mi hogar con su temblor insistente. Extiendo el brazo, localizando el botón en su lateral. El silencio regresa. Me levanto del colchón antes de que mi mente registre por completo la acción. 65 años, y todavía me despierto 30 minutos antes de cualquier alarma. Un hábito profundamente arraigado que parece no poder abandonar. Mi apartamento me recibe con su frío familiar. Una vivienda de una sola habitación en la planta baja de un antiguo edificio de 5 plantas, ubicado en la zona este de Kansas City. No es que carezca de los medios para algo superior. Ciertamente podría. Simplemente no tiene sentido para mí. Mis movimientos son mecánicos, perfeccionados durante décadas. Pongo la tetera en el fuego, saco la avena, preparo un té potente, nada de café, debido a mi presión arterial. Es un capricho prohibido. El suave resplandor gris del amanecer se filtra a través de las cortinas. En el alféizar descansa una foto de Beatriz, el único punto brillante en la penumbra matutina. Sonríe desde la foto que tomamos 6 meses antes de su fallecimiento, en nuestro 27º aniversario. Buenos días, Vi, digo, como lo he hecho cada día durante los últimos 14 años. No responde, pero siento que su sonrisa se vuelve más cálida. La fantasía de un anciano, nada más. Desayuno, me ducho y me visto. Mi uniforme de trabajo, pantalones azul oscuro y una chaqueta con el símbolo cívico de Kansas City, cuelga en el armario, planchado desde la noche anterior. Me los pongo sin sentir mucho orgullo, pero tampoco vergüenza. Son simplemente ropa para la profesión que he desempeñado durante casi 4 décadas. A las 5:15, ya estoy afuera. El aire es fresco, con un toque de primavera inminente. La lluvia reciente ha dejado las aceras relucientes bajo la tenue luz de las farolas dispersas. Son 20 minutos a pie hasta la estación de servicio municipal. Podría ir en coche, pero prefiero caminar. A mi edad, el movimiento constante es esencial para mantener la forma física. Pasan manzana tras manzana. Casas tranquilas, negocios cerrados, aparcamientos vacíos. La ciudad aún duerme, y solo individuos como yo perturban su tranquilo descanso. Me encuentro con algunos madrugadores, una mujer que corre a su turno en el hospital, un taxista que regresa de una noche de trabajo. Intercambiamos saludos, miembros no identificados de un grupo que vive al margen del ritmo diario habitual. Mis compañeros ya están ocupados en el taller. Algunos revisan sus equipos, mientras que otros fuman un cigarrillo antes de empezar su turno. Hoy me han asignado la zona de Central Park y sus calles adyacentes, y salgo en mi vehículo sanitario naranja brillante. No es la profesión más glamurosa, pero alguien debe ejercerla. El sol asciende lentamente sobre la ciudad mientras completo mi ruta inicial. El parque empieza a despertar. Aparecen los primeros corredores, luego los paseadores de perros, los oficinistas que corren a sus trabajos, atravesando los caminos. Algunos saludan, otros pasan de largo sin darse cuenta. Dejé de prestar atención a estas cosas hace mucho tiempo. Hola, señor Bishop, me llama una joven con un niño. Viene por aquí todas las mañanas. ¿Ha visto una ardilla pequeña con una pata herida? Le dimos de comer ayer. La vi cerca del mirador este, respondo. Parece que se está recuperando. La mujer sonríe y expresa su gratitud. El niño me saluda con la mano. Estos momentos, breves destellos de conexión humana dentro de la rutina, me recuerdan porque aún no me he jubilado. Al mediodía, el parque está lleno de gente y los contenedores de basura exigen mi atención. La tarea es complicada pero sencilla. Mantiene mis manos ocupadas y mis pensamientos libres. Pienso en mi próxima reunión con Albán, mi compañero y socio de toda la vida. Tenemos un posible acuerdo que podría añadir otro edificio comercial en las afueras del distrito financiero a nuestras propiedades. Una doble existencia. De día, soy Oral Bishop, trabajador de mantenimiento municipal. De noche, soy copropietario de Kila & Bishop Properties, una empresa de gestión inmobiliaria comercial que genera millones al año. Ninguno de mis colegas lo sabe. Ninguno de mis socios me ha visto nunca con el uniforme de conserje, y desde luego ningún familiar sospecha que el anciano al que consideran una carga pueda comprarlos y venderlos una y otra vez. A las 2 de la tarde, termino mi turno y me pongo ropa de calle. Después, tomo el autobús a casa, me ducho y como. A las 3:30, me siento frente a mi viejo portátil y reviso los informes diarios de nuestras diversas propiedades. Ellen gestiona las operaciones diarias, pero todas las decisiones importantes se toman conjuntamente. Mi bandeja de entrada está llena de consultas rutinarias y varias propuestas serias. Una de ellas es una solicitud de alquiler de un amplio local para un nuevo restaurante en un edificio que adquirimos el año pasado. Se necesita mi aprobación para las condiciones específicas de la renovación. Estudio los documentos, hago algunas llamadas y le comunico mi decisión a Elbón. A las 5 de la tarde, suena el teléfono. El número que aparece en la pantalla me encoge el corazón. Rib. Mi único hijo llama tan poco que cada llamada entrante parece una advertencia de problemas. Hola, respondo, intentando mantener la voz firme. Hola, la voz de Rib suena tensa. ¿Cómo estás? Una pregunta típica que no exige una respuesta sincera. Bien. ¿Y tú? Bien. Una breve pausa. Oye, tengo noticias. Me han ascendido. Ahora estoy a cargo del departamento de diseño. Felicidades. Me alegro de verdad por él. A pesar de nuestra compleja relación, Rip siempre ha tenido un don. Es un logro importante. Sí, gracias. Otro silencio. Este sábado, Thelma y yo tenemos una pequeña reunión para celebrar. Nada elaborado, solo compañeros de trabajo y un par de amigos. Espero a que continúe, pero Rip permanece en silencio. Claramente anticipa mi reacción. Me parece bien, digo finalmente. Sí. Bueno, se aclara la garganta. Pensé que tú también querrías asistir. La invitación suena tan tensa que casi puedo visualizar a Thelma a su lado, lo que lo impulsa a hacer ese gesto cortés. ¿A qué hora? Le pregunto, aunque ya sé que la noche será incómoda. A las 7, misma dirección. De acuerdo, allí estaré. Me comprometo, comprendiendo que no puedo negarme sin crear aún más tensión entre nosotros. Genial, dice, con un alivio evidente en la voz. Nos vemos el sábado entonces. Rip cuelga tan rápido que no tengo tiempo de despedirme. Cuelgo el teléfono y miro por la ventana la ciudad al anochecer. Los recuerdos me invaden. Rip a los 5 años, declarando con orgullo a su clase de kinder que su padre limpia un parque entero. Rip a los 10, todavía feliz cuando lo recogí del colegio con mi ropa de trabajo. Rip a los 14, pidiendo de repente que me dejaran a una manzana del colegio para que sus compañeros no vieran mi viejo coche ni mi ropa de trabajo. Y luego vino la creciente distancia. Al principio, fueron cosas sin importancia. Reticencia a presentarme a amigos, respuestas evasivas sobre mi profesión cuando me preguntaban, y luego, un enfado absoluto cuando aparecía en los eventos del colegio con ese aspecto. Tras el fallecimiento de Beatriz, la situación empeoró. Siempre había sido la mediadora entre nosotros, suavizando cualquier aspereza. Sin ella, éramos dos desconocidos, unidos solo por la sangre y las incómodas comidas familiares en días festivos. Cuando Rip me presentó a Thelma hace 5 años, supe de inmediato que era de esas personas que juzgan a los demás por su posición social y recursos económicos. Su fría cortesía y su sonrisa condescendiente comunicaban más que cualquier palabra. Después de su boda, nuestra comunicación se redujo a unas pocas llamadas al año y reuniones esporádicas. Podría haber revelado la verdad sobre el negocio, sobre el dinero, sobre por qué sigo trabajando como conserje, pero algo siempre me lo impide. Quizás sea la obstinación. Quizás sea el deseo de ser valorada por quien soy, no por las cifras de mi cuenta bancaria. O quizás simplemente tengo miedo de presenciar lo rápido que cambiarían sus actitudes si descubrieran la verdad. Así pues, existo entre dos reinos distintos, sin pertenecer plenamente a ninguno de los dos. Una vieja conserje con un secreto que podría cambiarlo todo, pero que, por alguna razón, no cambia nada. El viernes por la mañana, terminé mi turno 1 hora antes de lo habitual. El supervisor de obra hacía tiempo que había dejado de controlar mis horas, consciente de que siempre cumplía con mis tareas a la perfección. Al salir de las duchas comunes, me vi reflejada en el espejo empañado. Las arrugas y el pelo canoso habían envejecido mis rasgos, pero mi mirada seguía igual, esa mirada penetrante que Beatriz solía llamar visión de rayos X. Me peiné con cuidado el pelo ralo y me puse una camisa limpia que guardaba en mi taquilla. Esta noche no era una típica noche de cerveza frente al televisor. Tenía un compromiso de negocios. The Crossroads, un pequeño café situado en el límite entre las zonas comercial y residencial de la ciudad, Se había convertido en nuestro lugar preferido para charlas informales con el bon hacía 15 años. No es demasiado barato para que lo frecuentaran mis amigos conserjes, ni tan caro como para atraer la atención de la élite empresarial de Kansas City. Es el terreno neutral ideal. Llegué primero, como siempre, y reservé nuestra mesa habitual en la esquina, desde donde podía observar tanto la entrada como la cocina. Esta vieja costumbre de evaluar el espacio me acompañaba desde mi servicio militar. El bon llegó 7 minutos tarde, algo inusual en él. Lo siento, amigo, dijo, estrechándome la mano y sentándose en la silla frente a mí. Tráfico. Asentí, observando a mi viejo amigo, el bon Kill, un hombre corpulento de 62 años con una barriga que delataba su afición por la buena comida, y una abundante cabellera, aún espesa, pero completamente blanca. A diferencia de mí, parecía la quinta esencia del empresario de éxito, un traje caro, una corbata elegante y un anillo de oro en el dedo. Los demás clientes nos observaban, visiblemente desconcertados por una pareja tan improbable. Un anciano con atuendo sencillo y un empresario respetado. ¿Qué tal la reunión con Harrison? Pregunté cuando el camarero tomó nota. El bon se iluminó al instante, con los ojos brillantes como los de un niño pequeño. Todo fantástico. Tal como lo esperaba, el edificio de Oak Street se puede adquirir por debajo del valor de mercado. El propietario se está divorciando y necesita fondos urgentemente. 120,000 de entrada, el resto en cuotas a 3 años. ¿Y el estado del edificio? Yo siempre era el más cauteloso. El techo necesita reparaciones. El sistema de ventilación es viejo, pero funciona. Nada que no hayamos visto antes. Me entregó una carpeta con fotos y una evaluación técnica. El edificio está en una ubicación privilegiada. Se está construyendo un nuevo centro de transporte cerca. En 5 años, su valor aumentará al menos un 50%. Revisé los papeles meticulosamente. El bon rara vez se equivocaba en estos asuntos. Nuestra sociedad funcionó a la perfección. Evalué los riesgos y tomé las decisiones, y él las ejecutó. De acuerdo, haremos el pago inicial el lunes, pero que los abogados revisen todos los documentos, especialmente la sección sobre la división de bienes en el divorcio. Cerré la carpeta y se la devolví a el bon. No quiero terminar en los tribunales con un excónyuge furioso. Ya está todo arreglado, sonrió el bon. Llegó nuestra comida. Un simple filete con patatas para mí, un plato elaborado con una designación francesa para él. Este contraste también formaba parte de nuestro vínculo. Por la nueva adquisición. El bon levantó su vaso de cerveza. Asentí y tomé un trago. El tema de negocios quedó a un lado, al menos durante la comida. Pasamos a las conversaciones habituales de viejos amigos, salud, deportes, actualidad. Un poco más tarde, cuando sirvieron el postre, solo para el bon, ya que hacía tiempo que había renunciado a los dulces, me preguntó con indiferencia, mencionaste que tu hijo te invitó a una fiesta. Mañana, respondí brevemente. El bon hizo una mueca. Y irás con tu ropa de trabajo, por supuesto. No ocultó sus sentimientos sobre mi doble existencia. Escucha, Oral, quizás sea hora de decirles la verdad. Me imagino la cara de tu hijo y la de su. ¿Cómo se llama? Thelma. Sí, Thelma. Cuando descubran que el viejo conserje es en realidad millonario. Di un sorbo a mi café, sintiendo la familiar molestia que me invadía. Esta conversación se había repetido innumerables veces. Conoces mi perspectiva. Lo sé, pero no la comprendo. El bon apartó el plato con el postre intacto. Construimos esta empresa desde cero, lo logramos todo nosotros mismos. ¿Por qué insistes en trabajar de conserje? ¿Por qué le ocultas tu éxito a tu propia familia? Guardé silencio, pero el bon no iba a detenerse. ¿Recuerdas siquiera cómo empezó todo? El año 2010, el seguro de vida de Beatriz y el legado de tu tío. No era una suma enorme, pero nos arriesgamos. Compramos esa nave abandonada en la zona industrial y la reparábamos nosotros mismos los fines de semana. Dejé el taller mecánico y tú te quedaste en el departamento de servicios públicos. Entonces dijiste que era temporal, hasta que el negocio se consolidara. Es mi decisión, el bon. Sí, pero es una decisión ilógica. Bajó la voz al notar que algunos de los otros comensales empezaban a mirarnos. El negocio lleva más de una década prosperando. Podrías haber comprado una casa en el mismo barrio donde vive tu hijo, jubilarte y disfrutar de la vida. En cambio, seguiste viviendo en tu antiguo apartamento y saliendo cada mañana a barrer las calles. Miré a mi viejo amigo y comprendí su confusión. Nunca lo comprendería del todo. Para él, el comercio y el dinero siempre habían sido un medio para cambiar su vida, para ascender. Para mí, es simplemente una protección ante dificultades inesperadas, nada más. Hay asuntos más importantes que el dinero, dije finalmente. ¿Cómo cuáles? ¿La terquedad? ¿El orgullo? El Bon negó con la cabeza. ¿O simplemente quieres demostrarle algo a tu hijo? Había algo de verdad en sus palabras, y eso me dolió aún más. ¿Te acuerdas de Jerry Talbot? Pregunté, cambiando de tema. Por supuesto, asintió el Bon. Trabajaba con nosotros en el parque y ganó la lotería hace 15 años. Compró una casa grande y un automóvil. ¿Y qué fue de él después de eso? El Bon frunció el ceño. Sí, esa no es una historia muy agradable. Lo malgastó casi todo en tonterías. Lo último que supe es que estaba vendiendo su casa para saldar sus deudas. ¿Qué tiene que ver eso con? ¿Qué hay de Mark Saugnissi? Interrumpí. También estaba en nuestro equipo. Recibió una herencia considerable de su tía en Texas. Se lo gastó todo en la bebida y perdió su trabajo, dijo el Bon. Pero tú no eres Jerry ni Mark. Siempre has sido responsable con tus finanzas. Ese no es el punto principal. Dejé mi taza a un lado y me incliné más. He visto cómo el dinero transforma a las personas, y no se trata solo de que empiecen a gastar más. Cambian internamente. Dejan de apreciar los placeres sencillos de la vida. Empiezan a menospreciar a los demás. ¿Y tienes miedo de cambiar de esa manera? El Bon sonrió con suficiencia. ¿A los 65? No, tengo miedo de perder lo que tengo. ¿Y qué tienes? ¿Un apartamento viejo? ¿Un trabajo que te cansa la espalda? ¿Un hijo que se avergüenza de ti? Sus palabras le dolieron más de lo que creía. Poseo claridad, respondí en voz baja. Cada mañana me despierto y hago el trabajo que la gente me pide, no por dinero ni por posición social. Soy testigo de los resultados de mi trabajo, calles limpias, un parque bien cuidado. La gente me agradece no por mi valía económica, sino por lo que realmente hago. El Bon quiso discutir, pero continué. Y también poseo integridad. Sé quién soy realmente y cuál es mi verdadero valor. No quiero que mi hijo ni nadie me trate diferente solo por dinero. Si no me respetan como persona, su respeto por mi cuenta bancaria no vale nada. Siguió un silencio. El Bon hizo girar un tenedor en sus manos, reflexionando sobre mis palabras. ¿No has considerado que así es como estás poniendo a prueba a tu hijo? Sometiéndolo a una prueba en la que está destinado a fracasar. Me miró directamente a los ojos. Eso no es del todo justo, oral. Quizás, admití, pero si tengo que elegir entre el falso respeto por dinero y el desprecio absoluto por falta de él, elegiré esto último. Al menos es honesto. El Bon negó con la cabeza. Un viejo testarudo. Siempre lo ha sido. Sonrió, pero había un atisbo de tristeza en su mirada. Nos conocemos desde octavo y no has cambiado nada. ¿Recuerdas cuando quisieron expulsarnos por aquel incidente de las ranas en la dirección? Lo recuerdo. No pude evitar sonreír. Querías asumir toda la culpa. E insististe en que ambos confesáramos, aunque fue idea mía, rió el Bon. Y limpiamos el suelo del colegio juntos durante un mes. Fue una buena lección. Ambos guardamos silencio, perdidos en recuerdos del pasado lejano. Nuestra amistad es difícil de explicar a los forasteros. Nuestras personalidades son demasiado distintas. Nuestros caminos vitales demasiado divergentes. Pero algo nos conectó en la juventud y todavía nos une. Quizás sean principios compartidos ocultos tras diferentes apariencias. ¿Entonces vas a ir a la fiesta de tu hijo? Preguntó finalmente el Bon. Sí, asentí. Lo ascendieron. Es importante para él. Y tú harás el papel del pobre conserje, aunque podrías adquirir la empresa para la que trabaja. Seré yo mismo, lo corregí. No es un papel. El Bon suspiró, aceptando la derrota en este debate interminable. De acuerdo, como quieras, pero algún día tendrás que decirles la verdad. Quizás, respondí evasivamente. Cuando sea el momento. Pagamos la cuenta y salimos. Era una tarde agradable. A principios de abril en Kansas City suele hacer buen tiempo. El Bon se subió a su Lexus y rechacé su oferta de llevarme, prefiriendo caminar mientras mis piernas aún me lo permitieran. De camino a casa, reflexioné sobre la fiesta del día siguiente. ¿Qué me esperaba allí? Las sonrisas condescendientes de Thelma, los intercambios incómodos con mi hijo, las miradas curiosas de sus colegas, preguntándose cómo un hombre con una carrera tan prestigiosa podía ser hijo de un simple conserje. Recordé a Rip de niño, curioso, abierto al mundo. ¿Cuándo y cómo se transformó en una persona para quien la posición social y las opiniones ajenas se volvieron más cruciales que la familia? Beatriz siempre decía que yo era demasiado rígida con él. Quizás tenía razón. Quizás si aún viviera, las cosas habrían sido diferentes. Mi apartamento me recibió con su silencio habitual. Encendí la luz, puse la tetera y me senté a la mesa de la cocina, mirando una vieja fotografía en la pared. Yo, Beatriz y Rip, de 10 años, en un picnic en el parque. Todos sonriendo, alegres y despreocupados. Parecía que fuera en otra vida. ¿Qué habría dicho Beatriz de mi decisión de ocultarle la verdad sobre el negocio a mi hijo? Probablemente no lo habría aprobado. Siempre se esforzó por la franqueza y la honestidad en la familia. Pero ella nunca presenció cómo cambió nuestro hijo tras su muerte, cuán distante se volvió de mí y de mi trabajo. Suspiré y aparté la vista de la foto. Mañana será un día difícil. Necesito elegir un regalo para Rip. Algo lo suficientemente caro como para no parecer barato, pero no tanto como para despertar sospechas. Otra farsa que me he impuesto. A veces me pregunto si realmente vale la pena. Y cada vez llego a la misma conclusión: sí, lo vale. Porque, en definitiva, no se trata del dinero. Se trata de la verdad sobre las personas que te rodean. Y esa verdad puede ser dura. Pero es mejor saberla que vivir en un mundo de sonrisas fingidas y falso afecto. La mañana del sábado fue inusualmente luminosa. Me desperté temprano, a pesar de ser mi día libre. Los viejos hábitos son difíciles de romper. El cuerpo recuerda la rutina, incluso cuando la mente desea descansar. Tumbada en la cama, escuché cómo la ciudad despertaba gradualmente. El suave zumbido de los primeros automóviles, el canto de los pájaros fuera de mi ventana, el lejano aullido de una sirena. Pensar en la inminente fiesta me impedía relajarme del todo. Me imaginaba entrando en la espaciosa casa de Rip, con los invitados observando mi sencillo atuendo, susurrando en los rincones. ¿Sabías que su padre es conserje? Thelma sonreía tensamente, comprobando disimuladamente si había dejado manchas en su impecable suelo. Al levantarme de la cama, preparé el desayuno, avena y tostadas con mantequilla de cacahuete. Luego me afeité con cuidado, haciendo una mueca al mirarme al espejo. La vejez me había alcanzado, dejando profundas arrugas en la cara y manchas en las manos. Beatriz solía decir que eran las marcas de una vida bien vivida, una historia grabada en mi piel. Siempre supo encontrar la belleza donde otros solo veían imperfecciones. Después de ducharme, abrí el armario y revisé mi escaso guardarropa. Para eventos formales, tenía un traje azul oscuro que había comprado para el funeral de Beatriz. Colgaba en una funda para trajes, resguardado del polvo y del paso del tiempo. Junto a él había 2 camisas blancas y varias corbatas. Rara vez usaba estas prendas, prefería la comodidad de unos vaqueros y camisas sencillos. El traje me quedaba un poco más holgado que antes. Había perdido algunos kilos en los últimos años. No me sorprendió, dada mi ocupación y mi menor apetito después de los 60. Me anudé la corbata burdeos oscura que Rip me había regalado una vez por mi cumpleaños y me miré en el espejo. Nada mal para un anciano. A las 10, salí de mi apartamento y me dirigí al centro comercial. Necesitaba un regalo para mi hijo. ¿Qué se le regala a alguien por un ascenso? ¿Algo práctico o simbólico? Rara vez hacía regalos y desconocía las preferencias contemporáneas. Al final, tras una hora deambulando por las tiendas, me decidí por una pluma estilográfica cara presentada en una caja de madera oscura. Una selección atemporal que nunca pasa de moda. La vendedora la envolvió con mucho gusto en papel de regalo con una cinta plateada. Al salir de la tienda, sentí un poco de hambre y entré en una pequeña cafetería. Después de pedir un sándwich y un café, observé a los demás clientes, parejas jóvenes, familias con niños, grupos de adolescentes. Todos vivían su vida, ajenos a mis pensamientos y preocupaciones. A veces envidiaba su despreocupación y sus relaciones directas. Después de comer, deambulé un rato más por la ciudad, posponiendo el momento de volver a casa. Vehículos caros pasaban junto a mí, gente bien vestida pasaba con prisa y los escaparates relucían. Kansas City se transformaba ante mis ojos. Viejas estructuras daban paso a rascacielos de cristal. Rincones familiares desaparecían. Nuevos barrios emergían. Pero a pesar de todos los cambios, la esencia seguía siendo la misma. La ciudad vivía su propia existencia, indiferente al destino de los individuos. A las 3, ya estaba de vuelta en casa y decidí descansar un rato. La fiesta empezaba a las 7, y tardé unos 40 minutos en llegar a casa de Rev en autobús. Tuve tiempo suficiente para relajarme y ordenar mis pensamientos. Cuando me desperté a las 5, sentí una inusual sensación de anticipación. Las reuniones con mi hijo siempre me resultaban difíciles. Pero hoy, algo se sentía diferente. Quizás la conversación con el Bon me hizo reconsiderar nuestra relación desde una nueva perspectiva. O quizás simplemente estaba harta de la interminable simulación. Me puse el traje de nuevo, me anudé la corbata con cuidado y pulí mis zapatos viejos, pero aún presentables. Tomé el regalo y revisé mi cartera, y salí del apartamento. Hacía un clima agradable. La primavera estaba llegando. Decidí caminar hasta la parada del autobús, disfrutando del clima. El viaje a casa de Rev resultó ser más largo de lo que esperaba. El autobús se retrasó y luego se quedó atascado en el tráfico debido a un evento en el centro. Cuando finalmente llegué a su barrio, eran casi las 7:30. Estaba un poco ansiosa por llegar tarde, aunque sabía que casi nadie notaría mi ausencia. El barrio donde vivía Rev era notablemente diferente al mío. Casas impecables de 2 plantas con jardines meticulosamente cuidados, coches nuevos en las entradas, ni un solo grafiti ni una farola rota. Un entorno típico para jóvenes profesionales exitosos con ambiciones e hipotecas. La casa de Rev y Thelma, una estructura moderna con grandes ventanales y un diseño minimalista, destacaba incluso en esta próspera zona. Rev siempre aspiró a lo mejor, y su residencia actual reflejaba esa característica. Vi varios coches de lujo aparcados fuera de la casa. La fiesta ya estaba en su apogeo. Al acercarme a la puerta, saqué mi teléfono para llamar a mi hijo y avisarle de mi llegada. En ese preciso instante, la pantalla se iluminó. Había aparecido un mensaje. De Rev. Extraño, solía preferir llamar. Abrí el mensaje y me quedé paralizada. No vengas a mi fiesta. No quiero que sepan que eres conserje. 12 palabras, sencillas y contundentes. Sin excusas ni disculpas. Una orden directa, como decirle a un animal que se apartara. Releí el mensaje 3 veces, sin poder creer lo que veía. La amargura y la indignación me subieron a la garganta, cortándome la respiración. Me quedé de pie en medio de la acera, agarrando el teléfono, sin saber qué hacer a continuación. Las luces estaban encendidas dentro de la casa y se oían risas apagadas y música. A través de las puertas de cristal del patio, distinguía a la gente con copas. En algún lugar dentro estaba mi hijo, tan avergonzado de mí que prefirió enviarme este mensaje antes que enfrentarme cara a cara. No recuerdo cómo me di la vuelta y volví a la parada. Mis piernas se movían solas, alejándome del lugar donde era un huésped indeseable. Mi cabeza resonaba con el vacío, y solo la frase, no quiero que todos sepan que eres conserje, se repetía sin cesar, como un disco rayado. Me senté en un banco de la parada, todavía con el regalo en la mano. El envoltorio se me había desprendido y la cinta plateada había perdido su brillo. Observé los vehículos que pasaban sin verlos realmente. Mi teléfono vibró en el bolsillo. Sin mirar, supe que era Rev. Quizás le remordía la conciencia y quería disculparse. O quizás Thelma había descubierto el mensaje y le estaba obligando a rectificar. ¿Qué más daba? No lo comprobé. En cambio, marqué un número que me sabía de memoria. El Bon. Mi voz me sonó extraña incluso a mí. ¿Puedes venir a recogerme? ¿Qué pasa? Podía percibir la preocupación en su voz. Estoy en casa de Rev. La parada de autobús está en la esquina de Clifford Road y la 12ª Avenida. Llegaré en 20 minutos. ¿Estás bien? No, respondí con sinceridad. Para nada. Me senté en la parada, viendo cómo el cielo se oscurecía lentamente. La gente pasaba, algunos me miraban con curiosidad. Un hombre mayor con traje, sentado solo con un regalo en las manos. Debí de parecer perdida. El bon llegó incluso antes de lo prometido. Su Lexus plateado se detuvo suavemente junto a la acera. Salió del coche y se acercó a mí, mirándome a la cara con preocupación. ¿Qué ha pasado?, preguntó, sentándose a mi lado. En silencio, le mostré el mensaje de Rib. El bon lo leyó y masculló una maldición. El pequeño siseó con los dientes apretados. ¿Cómo podría? No quiere que sus invitados sepan que su padre es conserje. Me encogí de hombros, intentando mantener la voz firme. Lo entiendo. Seguramente todos sus colegas tienen estudios superiores y provienen de familias respetables. Y aquí está su viejo con un traje viejo y callos en las manos. ¡Basta!, me interrumpió el bon. No lo disculpes. Lo que hizo fue despreciable. Da igual a qué te dediques. No respondí. ¿Qué podía decir? El bon tenía razón, pero eso no lo hacía más fácil. Vámonos de aquí, dijo, levantándose y extendiéndome la mano. Te invito a cenar. No quiero ir a ningún sitio. Negué con la cabeza. Llévame a casa. ¿Para que te quedes ahí solo y te rindas con tu resentimiento? Ni hablar. Nos miramos fijamente. Dos viejos testarudos, poco acostumbrados a ceder. Finalmente, cedí y caminé hacia su coche. De camino, tiré el regalo para arriba a la basura. Que alguien más disfrutara del bolígrafo caro. En el coche, me senté en silencio, mirando por la ventana. El bon no intentó hablar conmigo, lo cual agradecí. Puso música tranquila, jazz que ambos habíamos apreciado desde la infancia, y condujo con tanta suavidad, como si transportara una frágil figura de porcelana que pudiera romperse con la más mínima sacudida. En lugar de un restaurante, me llevó a la oficina de Kill and Bishop Properties, un edificio modesto pero elegante en las afueras del distrito financiero. Rara vez lo visitaba, ya que prefería socializar con el bon en un ambiente más informal. ¿Qué hacemos aquí?, pregunté cuando apagó el motor. Tengo una idea, respondió el bon con esa sonrisa que también conocía. Una sonrisa que siempre había delatado travesuras desde la escuela. Subimos al segundo piso, donde se encontraban las oficinas de la empresa. El bon abrió la puerta con su llave y encendió las luces. Interior moderno, muebles minimalistas, algunas obras de arte en las paredes. Todo parecía costoso y elegante. Este aspecto del negocio siempre había sido su dominio. Siéntate, dijo, señalando la silla de cuero junto a su escritorio. ¿Te apetece algo? Negué con la cabeza, pero el bon, de todas formas, cogió una botella de whisky y 2 vasos. Lo necesitas hoy, dijo, sirviendo el líquido dorado. Por la amistad. Chocamos las copas y bebimos. El whisky me quemó la garganta, pero me trajo una extraña sensación de alivio. El nudo en el pecho se aflojó un poco. Ahora escucha. El bon dejó el vaso y se inclinó hacia mí. Tengo una estrategia. ¿Qué estrategia? Fruncí el ceño. Una estrategia para darle una lección a tu hijo. Esbozó esa sonrisa peligrosa. Vas a volver a esa fiesta. Ni hablar. Vas a volver, continuó, ignorando mi objeción, pero no como el padre de Rib, sino como Oral Bishop, copropietario de una próspera inmobiliaria.
I looked at him, trying to determine if he was serious. Why would I do that? Because your son needs to grasp how mistaken he was. Elbin poured more whiskey into my glass. Let him learn that a person is more than just their occupation or bank account. It will be a valuable lesson. Nonsense.
I shook my head.
I am not going to put on a performance to humiliate my own son. It is not a performance, Elbin countered.
Just a different facet of yourself.
You genuinely are a co-owner of the company, and you genuinely possess money and standing. You have simply been concealing it from him all these years. I remained silent, considering his words. The thought of witnessing Riv's expression when he recognized his error was tempting, but it conflicted with all my principles. It will not resolve the underlying issue, I stated finally.
It will only complicate things.
The issue already exists, Elbin insisted.
Your son rejected you because of your profession. What could be worse?
He was right, and I knew it. What did I have to lose? A relationship that was, in essence, already fractured. Okay, I took another sip of whiskey. Let us say I agree. What do you propose? Elben beamed as if he had won the lottery. First, you need to change your attire. He stood up and walked to the built-in wardrobe in the office corner. I have a spare suit here for important meetings. We are almost the same size. He retrieved a dark gray suit that appeared far more costly than my old blue one. It came with a crisp white shirt and a burgundy tie. Try it on. The restroom is over there. Elben handed me the clothes. I reluctantly took the suit and went to change. The fabric felt soft and pleasant to the touch. A suit like this likely cost as much as a janitor's monthly earnings. After putting it on, I looked in the mirror and was surprised to discover that it fit almost perfectly. A little broad in the shoulders, but overall, it seemed custom-made. When I emerged, Elben whistled.
You look like $1 million.
He scrutinized me from head to toe. Just a couple more refinements. He took cufflinks and an expensive watch from the desk drawer. Put these on. I complied, feeling increasingly absurd, like an actor preparing for a part he does not wish to play. Now for transportation, Elben took another set of keys from the hook by the door.
Take my company Mercedes.
It is newer and more impressive than the Lexus.
Elben is shook my head.
This is excessive. It is exactly right, he snapped. If we are going to act, we are going to act with grandeur. You will appear there as a successful businessman who happened to stop by the party. You will engage with the guests, discuss business, and we will observe how quickly your son recognizes you and what he does. The plan was audacious, an escapade suitable for adolescents, not respectable men in their 60s. But the whiskey and resentment had their effect. I nodded in agreement. Just promise you will not interfere, regardless of what occurs, I stated, looking Elben in the eye.
This is between myself and Rev.
I promise, he raised his hand solemnly. I will merely observe from a distance and collect you afterward, of course. We descended to the underground parking area where a black Mercedes was situated, a new model with chrome accents and a leather interior.
Elben handed me the keys.
Well, are you prepared to teach your son a lesson? I took the keys, still questioning if I was making the right choice, but the image of the message on my phone screen would not leave me alone. I do not want everyone to know you are a janitor. Well, today they will discover something entirely different. I am ready, I replied, getting behind the wheel.
The black Mercedes glided smoothly through the streets of Kansas City.
It had been a long time since I had operated such a costly vehicle, but my body remembered the motions. The seat gently cradled my back, and the dashboard glowed with a soft blue light. It was a completely different world compared to my old Ford, which I used for rare excursions. The neighborhood where Riv lived appeared even more striking in the deepening twilight. Neat houses radiated warm light from their windows, and decorative lanterns flickered on manicured lawns. The lives of people for whom clean streets are something inherent, a given that they never contemplate. As I neared my son's house, I noticed that the number of cars had increased. The party was in full swing. I parked the Mercedes in a prominent spot directly opposite the entrance.
Let them observe.
Let them speculate who had arrived. As I exited the car, I caught my reflection in the tinted glass. A gray-haired man in an expensive suit with an upright posture and a confident stare. No trace of the janitor who awoke at 4 in the morning to tidy the city park. I took a deep breath, gathering my resolve. What I was about to do went against all my convictions, but sometimes principles must be set aside. Riv's house was ablaze with lights. Through the large windows, I could see figures of people and hear muted music and laughter. I did not ring the doorbell. I simply opened it and walked in as if I had every right to be there. No one stopped me. There are no security personnel at parties such as this. The hallway welcomed me with warmth and the murmur of voices from the living room. I removed my coat and hung it on a hook, attempting to appear self-assured and natural. My heart was pounding furiously, but I maintained my composure externally. Years of business negotiations had taught me to conceal my feelings. There were about 20 individuals in the living room, men in suits and women in cocktail dresses. They stood in clusters, glasses in hand, engaged in lively conversations. It was a typical middle-class gathering with a pretense of sophistication. I immediately spotted Riv. He was standing at a makeshift bar in the far corner of the room, speaking with two men his age. Thelma flitted among the guests, the perfect hostess in a form-fitting blue dress. None of them noticed my entrance, and I decided that was for the best. I needed to orient myself, to sense the atmosphere before initiating a direct confrontation. I walked over to the bar nearer the entrance and requested a whiskey on the rocks from the young bartender. "Beautiful house," I remarked to the bartender, glancing around. "Do you know who owns it?" "Mr. Bishop," the young man replied, handing me a glass. "That gentleman over there at the far bar in the gray suit." I nodded, feigning that I had only just noticed his son. "Thank you. I am familiar with his company, but this is my first time seeing him." The bartender smiled, but said nothing, turning his attention to another guest.
"I stepped aside with my glass, observing the scene."
No one paid any particular notice to me, merely another respectable gentleman in a fine suit, of whom there were many present. I moved slowly along the room's perimeter, listening to the conversations, the usual topics for such assemblies: work, politics, real estate, the latest local news. I saw my son from the corner of my eye, and deliberately avoided looking in his direction. Let him notice me when the moment was right. I paused near the snack table, examining the exquisite canapés and tiny pastries. Two men stood nearby, animatedly discussing some business venture. "But investing in the city center is risky right now," said one of them, a tall blond man in his 40s. "After that controversy with urban planning, all projects have been put on hold." "Not all of them," objected the second, a stocky man with a receding hairline. "Western Development has secured approval to refurbish the old post office." I took a sip of whiskey and casually joined their conversation. "Pardon my interruption, but as far as I know, Western has encountered some financial difficulties. The bank withdrew its credit line last week." Both men turned to me in surprise. "Are you certain?" asked the blond man. "I have not heard anything about that." "Absolutely," I smiled. "We were interested in participating in this project, but we withdrew in time. My intuition told me that something was amiss." "Are you involved in real estate?" asked the man with the receding hairline. "Yes, commercial property management," I said, extending my hand. "Oral Bishop, Quill, and Bishop Properties."
"Bishop."
The blond man frowned. "Like the homeowner."
"Coincidence is tracked."
"As far as I know, we are not related. I am actually here at the invitation of mutual acquaintances." We exchanged handshakes and business cards. Both were engaged in the construction sector. One managed an architectural firm, the other supplied materials. The conversation flowed smoothly to trends in the Kansas City real estate market, and I found myself enjoying the discussion. It had been a long time since I had interacted with individuals from the business world in an informal setting. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that Riv was observing us. He had clearly spotted the stranger conversing with his guests. I turned my back so he could not see my face. It was not yet time. A few minutes later, a third man joined us, tall, fit, with graying dark hair. "James Hawthorne," he introduced himself. "I could not help but overhear your discussion about Western. I advised them on legal matters, and your information regarding financial problems is news to me." "Nice to meet you," I shook his hand. "The information is confidential, but trustworthy. I anticipate it will be in the news by Monday." Hawthorne looked at me intently. "Your face seems familiar. Have we met before?" I tensed but attempted not to show it. I do not believe so. I rarely attend social gatherings. Strange, he said, still staring at my face. I could have sworn. At that moment, Riv approached our group. He was smiling, but I could see the tension in his eyes. The host of the house checking on a stranger among his guests. Gentlemen, I trust you are all enjoying yourselves? He glanced around at his companions, deliberately avoiding looking at me. Everything is wonderful, Riv, Hawthorne replied. We are just speaking with your namesake about the real estate market. Riv finally turned to me, extending his hand. Riv Bishop, I do not believe we have been introduced. Oral Bishop. I shook his hand, looking him directly in the eye.
Pleasure to meet you.
For a second, his face showed nothing but polite interest. Then his pupils widened, and his mouth opened in silent astonishment. He recognized me. His hand slipped limply from mine. Father, he whispered so softly that only I could hear him. I smiled, savoring the moment more than I should have. Excuse me. I asked loudly enough for the others to hear. Riv seemed to freeze. He stared at me, unable to believe his eyes. My son, who had always prided himself on his composure, now looked like a man who had witnessed a ghost. I thought, he faltered, trying to gather his thoughts. You look very much like my father. Really? I raised an eyebrow. What an interesting coincidence. What does your father do? Riv turned even paler. The other men watched the strange scene with interest. He is a manager in public utilities.
Riv managed to say, liar.
Even now, he could not bring himself to speak the truth.
A respectable profession.
I nodded. Public utilities form the backbone of urban infrastructure. Without them, everything would collapse within a week. Riv nervously licked his lips. Excuse me, I need to check something in the kitchen. He practically fled, leaving us bewildered. Strange fellow, remarked the man with the receding hairline. Has he always been like that? I do not know, I shrugged. We just met. The conversation resumed, but I was no longer following it. My gaze was fixed on Riv, who was walking quickly through the living room, clearly searching for someone. Thelma, of course. He needed support to cope with the shock. I apologized to my companions and moved in the opposite direction towards the bar. I needed to buy some time to decide how to proceed. Elbin's plan had worked even better than we had expected. Riv was completely thrown off balance. But what now? Continue the game or lay our cards on the table? At the bar, I ordered another whiskey and turned around, surveying the room. The guests continued to chat, oblivious to the drama unfolding right before their eyes. I noticed Riv and Thelma in the far corner. They were whispering heatedly about something. Thelma glanced in my direction several times, but from that distance, she could hardly discern my face clearly.
A wonderful party, is it not?
A woman's voice sounded next to me. I turned and saw an elegant middle-aged woman in a dark green dress. She smiled as she extended her hand to me.
Veronica Stillman.
I work with Riv at the architecture firm. Oral Bishop.
Is shook her hand. Nice to meet you, Veronica.
Are you related to Riv? She looked me over with professional interest. We share the same last name, and there is a certain resemblance. Just a coincidence, I replied, taking a sip of whiskey. I am in town on business and ended up here at the invitation of mutual acquaintances. I see. She clearly did not believe me, but did not press the matter. And what is your profession, Mr. Bishop? Commercial real estate management, I said, taking out my business card and handing it to her. We have several properties in Kansas City. Veronica studied the card, then looked up at me with surprise. Quill and Bishop? Do you own the building at 120 Oak Street? Yes, that is one of our first properties. I was surprised.
Are you familiar with it?
Of course. she laughed.
Out of his rents space on the third floor.
We have been tenants of your company for 5 years. How ironic. The firm my son worked for rented space from my company. Riv must have seen the name Quill and Bishop on documents many times and never connected it with me. It is a small world, I smiled. I hope you are satisfied with everything. More than satisfied, Veronica nodded. You have an excellent manager.
Mr. Kill, y Believe. Yes, el bon Kill, my partner.
I felt proud of my friend. He is in charge of daily operations. I am more responsible for strategy. We continued our conversation about real estate and architecture. Veronica proved to be an intelligent and engaging conversationalist. At one point, I almost forgot where I was and why. It was pleasant to simply speak with an intelligent person without contemplating the difficulties with my son. But reality reminded me of itself when I noticed Thelma heading in our direction. She walked purposefully, like a guided missile, piercing me with her gaze. Unlike Riv, she was clearly in a confrontational mood. I apologized to Veronica and turned to my approaching daughter-in-law. Thelma was a beautiful woman, slender with well-groomed blonde hair and sharp features. Now those features were distorted by a mixture of shock and anger. Mr. Bishop. She stopped in front of me, her arms crossed over her chest. May I speak with you privately? Of course, Mrs. Bishop. I nodded politely. Where would you prefer to go? To the study. She nodded towards the hallway.
No one will disturb us there.
I followed her through the living room, feeling the curious glances of the guests. Riv stood at the study door, pale and confused. He silently stepped aside to allow us in, then entered himself and closed the door behind him. The office was decorated in a modern style, minimalist furniture, bookshelves, a large computer desk by the window. On the walls were Riv's diplomas and certificates, several abstract paintings. There were no family photographs, which did not surprise me. Thelma stood at the desk, her arms crossed over her chest. Riv remained by the door as if poised to flee. What does all this signify? Thelma asked, not concealing her irritation. What are you doing here? Like this. I calmly sat down in the visitor's chair without seeking permission. I was invited to this party, I said, looking at my son. Isn't that correct, Riv? Riv flinched as if he had been struck. Yes, but then I withdrew the invitation. He tried to speak firmly, but his voice trembled. And you came in this manner. Why? I slowly looked around, assessing the situation. Expensive furnishings, designer items.
Riv had always admired beautiful things.
As a child, he drew houses from magazines and cut out pictures of cars he someday wished to own. Now he possessed it all, but he did not appear happy. You sent me a message, I said, looking him directly in the eye.
Do not come to my party.
I do not want everyone to know you are a janitor. Thelma turned sharply to her husband. You wrote that to him.
Seriously, Riv?
Riv blushed but did not deny it. I just did not want. You did not want your colleagues to know about my job. I finished for him. Were you afraid they would mock you, or that they would not take you seriously? You do not understand.
Riv shook his head.
In my world, it is important. People judge you by your surroundings, by your family, and that is why you chose to disown your father. I nodded as if it were the most logical decision in the world.
An interesting choice.
I did not reject you. Riv's voice sounded uncertain. I merely wished to postpone the meeting to another day. Of course, I nodded. That is precisely what you intended in your message. Thelma shifted her gaze from her husband to me, clearly attempting to understand the situation. She had always been observant, and now her eyes narrowed with suspicion. If you are a janitor, she said slowly, then where did you acquire that suit and the car? Someone mentioned you arrived in a black Mercedes. I looked at her with a slight smile. Does it matter, Thelma? Does it matter what I am wearing or what I drove here in? The main thing is that I am not ashamed to present myself to your guests, correct? Riv finally moved away from the door and approached us. Dad, please. His tone became almost pleading. I do not understand what is happening.
Where did you get all this?
I rose from my chair and slowly walked around the office, looking at the books on the shelves. Mostly reference works on architecture and design, a few biographies of famous architects, no fiction, which Riv had devoured as a child. I decided to honor your request, I said without turning around. You did not want your guests to perceive me as a janitor, so I arrived not as a janitor. But, Riv faltered, that suit, it looks very expensive.
And the Mercedes, I do not understand.
I turned to face him. What is there to understand? You judge people by their outward appearance, by their possessions. So I appeared before you in a form that you respect. Did you rent the suit?
Thelma narrowed her eyes.
And the car, too. Just to what?
To humiliate Riv. Think what you wish.
I shrugged. The only thing that matters is that I meet your expectations. Now you can safely introduce me to your guests without fear for your standing. Riv looked utterly bewildered. He nervously ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he had adopted from me, though he was hardly conscious of it. Dad, I am sorry about the message. He finally said, I did not mean to hurt your feelings. It is just that tonight is an important evening for my career, with my bosses and colleagues present. And you concluded that your old janitor would ruin everything? I finished for him. Do not distort his words, Thelma interjected. Riv never stated he was ashamed of you. There are simply certain standards in his profession. Image is crucial. And what image have you crafted for your father? I looked at my son. What do you tell your colleagues about me?
Riv and Thelma exchanged quick glances.
At that moment, it became clear to me that they had coordinated their story in advance. I told the truth, Riv straightened up, attempting to appear more confident. That you work for the city maintenance department. As a manager, Thelma added, you are in charge of your district, correct? I am a janitor, Thelma, I said calmly. Senior supervisor, to be precise.
I clean the streets and parks.
I make the city cleaner for people like you who never consider where the waste goes. Thelma looked as if I had struck her. Riv quickly stepped between us. Dad, no one is diminishing the importance of your work. It is just. He faltered again, not knowing how to phrase his thoughts without hurting me further. It is just that you lied to your friends and colleagues, I finished for him. You invented a father to be proud of. That is not true. Riv raised his voice, then caught himself and continued more quietly. I have never been ashamed of you. I just sometimes embellished certain details. Of course, I smirked. That is why you forbade me from coming today, so I would not expose your exaggerations. An awkward silence ensued. Outside, there was a muffled hum of conversation and laughter. The party was in full swing, the guests enjoying each other's company, unaware of the drama unfolding behind the closed door of the office. I will reiterate my question.
Thelma broke the silence.
Where did you obtain the suit and car? I looked at her with interest. Unlike Riv, she was not embarrassed or apologetic. Thelma desired to know the truth, and I could not deny her that. I have a friend who occasionally lends me things, I replied evasively. Today, he chose to help me make an impression. And this friend is wealthy enough to own the latest Mercedes and a suit that costs at least $2,000? Thelma raised her eyebrows skeptically. He operates a successful business, I shrugged. Riv finally collected his thoughts. Listen, Dad, I understand that you are upset. But let us not ruin the evening. My colleagues are already curious about you. Perhaps we should rejoin the guests and simply have a pleasant evening. I looked closely at my son. His eyes displayed a mixture of shame, regret, and calculation. He was still hoping that I would help him save face in front of his colleagues. Of course, I nodded. And how will you introduce me?
As your janitor father?
Or will you continue with your embellishments? Riv swallowed.
I will tell the truth that you are my father.
The rest does not matter. The truth has not mattered to you for a long time.
I shook my head.
But I will play along today. I will be whoever you want me to be.
Thelma's expression suddenly altered.
She seemed to realize something, and her eyes widened in surprise. Wait.
She came closer.
You said your company is called Quill and Bishop. That is correct. I nodded.
Comercial Real Estate Management.
But, she turned to Riv, isn't that where we rent our office? Riv froze as if struck by lightning. The thought had clearly not occurred to him before. Yes, but, he shook his head. No, it is a coincidence. Bishop is a common surname. Not that common, Thelma objected, keeping her eyes fixed on me. Oral Bishop, the owner of Quill and Bishop Properties. It is not just a rented suit, is it? I smiled without answering. Thelma had always been quicker to grasp things than Riv. It cannot be, Riv whispered. You have been.
Aldistime.
There was a knock at the office door, interrupting our conversation. Without awaiting a response, Veronica, the woman I had been speaking to at the bar, peeked inside. Sorry to interrupt, she smiled. But the guests are inquiring about the homeowners. And many would like to meet Mr. Bishop Sr. Riv looked like a man cornered. He looked helplessly first at me, then at Thelma. We will be right out, he mumbled. Veronica nodded and closed the door. I adjusted my tie and headed for the exit. Let us go. We do not wish to keep the guests waiting, I said, opening the door. The evening is just beginning.
Riv hurried after me, grabbing my elbow.
Wait, we have not concluded our conversation. As you say, I stopped.
What else do you wish to know?
The truth. His eyes gleamed feverishly.
The complete truth. Who are you, truly?
I am who I have always been, Riv, I replied calmly. Your father. Everything else is merely details. Details. He laughed nervously. You arrive in a Mercedes, wearing a suit that costs thousands, introduce yourself as the owner of the company we lease our office from, and you call that details? Did you not just say that it does not matter? I raised an eyebrow. That the only thing that matters is that I am your father? Riv opened his mouth to argue but could not find the words. Thelma approached us, her face relaxed as if she had made an important decision. We need to rejoin the guests, she said firmly.
Riv, compose yourself.
We will address all this later. She was the first to leave the office, smiling as if nothing untoward had occurred. A true socialite, capable of maintaining her poise in any circumstance. Riv followed her, giving me one last confused glance. I was the last to leave, closing the door behind me. In the living room, we were met with curious gazes. The conversations quieted, and everyone looked at the strange trio returning from the office. Thelma took the initiative. Friends, allow me to introduce Oral Bishop. She smiled, pointing at me. Riv's father and, as it turns out, a successful businessman.
A murmur of surprise rippled through the room.
Several people came closer, eager to make my acquaintance. I shook hands, responded to questions, pretending that this was the most normal situation in the world. Riv stood nearby, smiling stiffly and occasionally interjecting a word or two. So, you are the owner of Quill and Bishop? Asked one of the men, who introduced himself as Riv's colleague. Our firm rents space from you on Oak Street. Co-owner, I corrected.
I have a partner, el bon Kill.
He handles the daily management. How surprising. The woman next to him shook her head. Riv never mentioned that his father was in real estate. All eyes turned to Riv, who looked as if he wished to disappear through the floor. We do not discuss work very often, he muttered. Riv has always been a modest young man, I smiled, enjoying his discomfort. He does not like to boast about his family connections. He prefers to achieve everything on his own. Several guests nodded approvingly. Riv looked at me with a blend of gratitude and suspicion. And yet, the man continued, what a coincidence, working for a company that leases office space from your father.
Life is full of unexpected turns, I shrugged.
But to be honest, I only learned about it today. As I said, my partner is in charge of operations. I am more responsible for strategic planning. Thelma, standing nearby, listened intently to my every word. I could sense her analyzing the information, assembling the pieces into a complete picture. How long has your company been operating, Mr. Bishop? She asked innocently. Elben and I founded it almost 15 years ago, I replied, looking her directly in the eye. After my wife passed away.
Beatrice, Riv's mother.
Riv flinched as if he had been struck. His mother's name clearly caught him off guard. 15 years, Thelma repeated. But all this time you have been working as a janitor. I mean, in the city maintenance department. The guests listened to our conversation with heightened interest. The story was becoming increasingly complex and fascinating. I combined the two, I smiled. I love my work. It provides me with perspective. It reminds me of life's essential aspects. What an amazing philosophy, Veronica said. Most people in your situation would have abandoned physical labor long ago. Most people are too concerned with what others perceive of them, I replied. I prefer to live by my own principles. This statement clearly resonated. Riv looked away, and Thelma pursed her lips. The other guests, not understanding the deeper meaning, nodded approvingly. To independence of spirit, someone proclaimed, raising a glass. The others joined in the toast. The conversation flowed into general topics, and the guests divided into groups. I found myself surrounded by several of Riv's colleagues who questioned me with interest about the Kansas City real estate market. I answered in detail and with expertise, feeling the intense gaze of his son, who stood nearby with Thelma. What are your thoughts on the new project to redevelop the old industrial zone? Asked one of the architects. Is it a worthwhile investment in real estate there? It is a promising area, I replied. But I would advise waiting until the city finishes its infrastructure projects. Roads, sewage, power grids, all of these require substantial modernization. That is exactly what I argued at the last meeting, exclaimed the architect, addressing his colleagues. See, Mr. Bishop confirms my perspective. I noticed Riv finally separating from Thelma and heading towards us. His face showed the resolve of a man prepared for a serious discussion. Excuse me, he said, addressing his colleagues.
May I borrow my father for a moment? Family matters.
The architects nodded understandingly and moved away, continuing to discuss the renovation project. Riv took me by the elbow and led me aside, where no one could overhear us. I want to know the truth, he said quietly but firmly.
The whole truth.
Now. I looked at my son, his tense face, his tight lips, his determined gaze. He was so much like me when I was young. The same stubborn jaw, the same lines around his mouth when he was nervous. And yet so different inside. Too many compromises, too much significance given to the opinions of others. The truth is, I said, I am indeed a co-owner of Quill and Bishop Properties, and I am indeed a janitor. Both of these things can exist simultaneously, River. But how? Why? He shook his head. If you possess money, a business, why persist in working as a janitor? Because I choose to, I replied simply. Because this work gives my life purpose. Because I appreciate cleanliness and order. I love to witness the tangible results of my efforts every day. And because it is honest work that no one should ever feel ashamed of.
Rip flinched at my final words.
I am not ashamed of your work, he said quietly. It is just. It is difficult to articulate. No, River. It is quite simple to explain.
I shook my head.
You are ashamed. You have always been ashamed. Ever since high school, when your friends began to tease you because your father cleaned the streets. He did not deny it, merely lowered his eyes. But why conceal your business from me? He asked after a pause.
Altesse years.
You could have told me. What would have changed? I shrugged. Would you have started respecting me more, or just the money I could have provided you? That is not fair.
Rip shook his head.
You did not give me an opportunity. You just decided that is who I was, and that was that.
Wesi mistaken.
I looked him directly in the eye.
Do not come to my party.
I do not want everyone to know you are a janitor. Those were your words, Riv, not mine. Riv did not know how to respond. At that moment, Thelma approached us with 2 glasses of champagne in her hands. She handed one to me. I think we could all use a drink, she said with a forced smile.
To Familia Relaciones.
I took the glass and raised it. To the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. We clinked glasses and drank. The champagne was superb, dry with a subtle fruity bouquet. Thelma always knew how to select fine things, whether it was clothing, furniture, or beverages. In another life, we might even have gotten along. We need to return to the guests, she said after a brief pause. We have already drawn too much attention. Riv nodded silently, still lost in his thoughts. I followed them to the center of the living room where soft music was now playing, and several couples were dancing in the open space between the sofas. The atmosphere had become more relaxed. The cocktails had served their purpose. The conversations were louder, the laughter freer. Riv walked away to speak with an elderly gentleman, likely his boss, judging by my son's respectful demeanor. Thelma also vanished in the direction of the kitchen, perhaps to ensure everything was in order with the appetizers. I was left alone with a glass of champagne, observing the proceedings with a slight detachment. Mr. Bishop, a short man with a receding hairline and thin-rimmed glasses, addressed me. Sorry to interrupt.
I am Nolan Crosby, CFO of Western Development.
I shook his outstretched hand, immediately recalling the company I had mentioned earlier to the guests. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Crosby. I believe we discussed your project to renovate the old post office. That is precisely what I wished to speak about. Crosby lowered his voice. I do not know where you obtained your information about our financial difficulties, but it is remarkably precise. The bank has indeed withdrawn its line of credit, and we are actively seeking new investors. I tried to conceal my surprise. It was pure chance. I mentioned Western simply as an illustration, based on rumors I had heard from Elbin a couple of weeks prior. But Crosby clearly concluded that I possessed inside information. Information is the key to successful investing, I replied evasively. But I am sorry to hear that your company is experiencing difficulties. Actually, Crosby took another step closer. I thought that perhaps Quill and Bishop might be interested in the project. The post office building has historical significance, and after renovation, its value will triple. That is an interesting proposition, I said, taking a sip of champagne to buy some time to think. But I need to discuss it with my partner. Perhaps you could send us the project details.
Crosby's eyes lit up with hope.
He quickly produced a business card from his jacket pocket and handed it to me. Of course, I can have a complete dossier prepared by Monday, or even sooner if that is convenient for you. I took the card and nodded politely, making no promises. A small group of guests was already approaching us, likely drawn by the chance to chat with a new and engaging conversational partner. The next hour was spent discussing the real estate market, promising areas for investment, urban policy, and the economy. I found myself enjoying these discussions. My years of collaboration with Elben had not been in vain, and I was quite knowledgeable about all these subjects. People listened to me with interest, asked questions, and shared their thoughts. No one looked down on me. No one considered me unworthy of their company. From time to time, I noticed Riv watching me from a distance. His face expressed a mixture of surprise, confusion, and pride. Yes, perhaps something resembling pride flickered in his eyes when one of his colleagues respectfully listened to my opinion on urban development projects. Thelma was also observing me, but more subtly. She moved from one group of guests to another, always remaining within earshot of our conversations. Her demeanor had changed. Now she saw me not as an irritating inconvenience, but as a valuable asset, unexpectedly discovered in her home. By 10 o'clock in the evening, the conversation had smoothly transitioned to my company. One of the architects, a man named Leslie, turned out to be the designer of the renovation project for the shopping center that Quill and Bishop had recently acquired. "I cannot believe I encountered you here," he said, shaking my hand energetically. "I have worked with Mr. Quill, but I have always desired to meet you. Your company made the correct decision in preserving the building's original facade. Elben informed me about your project." I nodded. "You have done an excellent job of maintaining the historic appearance while modernizing the interior." Riv, who was standing nearby, listened intently to our conversation, and I noticed his eyes widen in surprise. He clearly did not expect his father to actually possess any knowledge about architecture and construction. "So, it is true?" Leslie asked, looking back at Riv. "Are you really Riv's father?" And he never mentioned that his father owns one of the largest real estate companies in the city. "Riv and I do not discuss work very often," I replied, looking at my son. "We have different interests." And yet, Veronica interjected, who had also joined our group. "What an amazing coincidence. An architect whose father owns real estate. You could say it is a family business." Riv tensed up, and I decided to spare him from having to explain our complicated relationship. "Actually, I never interfered in my son's career decisions," I said. "I believe that everyone should choose their own path. Riv always loved to draw and dreamed of creating beautiful buildings since childhood. I am proud that he has realized his dream." Those words were true. Despite all our differences, I was genuinely proud of Riv's accomplishments. He achieved everything on his own, without my assistance. Maybe that was part of the problem. He never felt that I supported his aspirations. Riv looked at me with surprise, then nodded and smiled slightly. "Thank you," he said quietly. The conversation continued, jumping from topic to topic. Gradually, the guests began to depart, and the party was drawing to a close. By 11:30, only a few people remained in the house. Riv and Thelma's closest friends, who were helping to clear the tables and take the dishes to the kitchen. I was also about to leave when Riv approached me with 2 glasses of whiskey. "Would you like to stay a little longer?" he asked, handing me a glass. "I think we have something to discuss." I took the whiskey and nodded. Riv led me to the backyard where there was a small patio with comfortable chairs. The night was warm, and the air smelled of jasmine and freshly cut grass. We sat down, looking out at the well-tended garden lit by several garden lanterns. We sat in silence for a few minutes, sipping our whiskey. Finally, Riv broke the silence. "Why did you never tell me about your business?"
He talked for a moment, staring at the amber liquid in my glass.
At first, there was no particular reason. Then it became too late.
Too late for what? For the truth is truth.
After your mother passed, we grew apart. You were already ashamed of my work back then. And I was probably too stubborn to try to change your mind. Riv was silent for a long time, then asked quietly, How did it come about? The business, I mean. I took a sip of whiskey, gathering my thoughts. Do you remember Uncle Elben, my childhood friend who used to visit for barbecues? Vaguely, Riv nodded. The large man who always brought me toy soldiers. Yes, that is him. I smiled at the memory. After your mother died, I had some insurance money remaining. Not an enormous sum, but significant. And a small inheritance from my uncle. Elben was working in an auto repair shop at the time, but he had always been interested in real estate. He suggested investing the money in an abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts. We renovated it ourselves, divided it into sections, and leased it to small businesses. It proved to be very profitable. Riv listened attentively without interrupting. Then there was a second property, a third.
Iguapt Maihan.
The rest is like something from a textbook. We reinvested the profits and expanded gradually. Elben left the garage and went into business full-time. I continued to work as a janitor. But why? There was genuine incomprehension in Riv's voice. If you had a successful business, why continue with this job? Because I love it, I replied simply. It gives my life purpose, a sense of meaning. I see the results of my efforts every day. Clean streets, well-maintained parks. People thank me not for the money, but for what I actually do.
Riv shook his head.
I do not understand. You could be living a completely different life. You could have what? I interrupted him. A grand house, an expensive car, prestigious acquaintances. Why would I desire all that? At least for comfort, Riv shrugged. You live in the same apartment you did 30 years ago. I like it. It is quiet, comfortable, close to the park where I work. Riv fell silent again, pondering my words. Then he asked the question that seemed to trouble him the most. Did you conceal this from me because you did not trust me? I sighed. How could I explain to him something that I did not always comprehend myself? That is not it, River. When the business was just starting, you were a teenager full of ambition and dreams of a beautiful life. I saw how ashamed you were of my work, how you avoided discussing it with your friends, and I decided to test you. I wanted to know if you could accept me for who I am, not because of money or status. And I failed your test, Riv said with a bitter smile. It is not about the test, I shook my head. It is just that over time, our lives diverged too significantly. You were building your career. I was conducting business with Elben. We saw each other less and less. And then Thelma arrived. What does Thelma have to do with it? Riv frowned. She reinforced your desire for social recognition, I replied honestly. Thelma is one of those individuals who values the external attributes of success. Expensive items, a prestigious address, the right circle of friends. And you became the same. Riv wanted to argue, but at that moment, the patio door opened, and Thelma appeared in the doorway. As if summoned by our conversation, she stepped out into the garden, elegant even at the conclusion of a long evening, with barely noticeable signs of fatigue on her face. All the guests have departed, she said, sitting down in a chair next to us. What are you discussing? The past, I replied. The choices we make and the outcomes we live with. Thelma nodded as if she understood much more than was spoken. She truly was an intelligent woman, whatever I thought of her values. I wish to apologize, she said unexpectedly, for how we treated you. It was wrong. I looked at her closely, trying to discern if her remorse was genuine or merely a reaction to the circumstances. Thelma is right, Riv added. We should have treated you with more respect, regardless of your job.
I am sorry, Dad.
His voice sounded sincere, but something in his gaze, a quick exchange of glances with Thelma, a slight movement of his eyebrows, betrayed other motivations. Not just remorse, but calculation. My son and his wife had just discovered that the old janitor was actually a wealthy businessman. Of course, Their attitude had shifted. We could begin anew, Thelma suggested with a warm smile. See each other more often, get to know each other better. You could move closer to us, to a more prestigious neighborhood. I raised an eyebrow. Well, if you can afford it, why not? She shrugged, not noticing the irony in my question. There are beautiful homes here, excellent neighbors. You do not have to live in that old apartment anymore. And you would not have to work as a janitor anymore, either, Riv chimed in. You could dedicate yourself entirely to your business or simply relax, travel. I looked at them, so beautiful and well-groomed, sitting in their perfect garden near their perfect house, and felt a chill spread through me. Nothing had fundamentally changed. They still did not understand me, did not accept my choice. Only now, knowing about the money, they were willing to tolerate my presence in their lives. You know what is the saddest part? I said, placing my empty glass on the table. That you still do not grasp the most important thing. It was never about money or status. It was about respect, about accepting a person for who they truly are. But we respect you, Riv objected. Especially now that we know about your success. Exactly. I smiled bitterly. Especially now. Until today, I was just an old janitor who you were too ashamed to show your friends. Now I have suddenly become a respected businessman worthy of your attention. But I have not changed, River. I am still the same person. It is just that now you know about my bank account.
Thelma and Riv exchanged confused glances.
Perhaps they genuinely did not comprehend what the problem was. For them, the world was always divided into winners and losers, and the criteria were simple: money, status, power. I am glad we have clarified things, I said, standing up. Thanks for the evening. It was enlightening.
Are you leaving?
Riv stood up too. It is late.
Perhaps you will stay the night.
We have a guest room. No, thank you.
I shook my head. Elbon is waiting for me.
We arranged to meet after the party. It was a fabrication. We had not made plans with Elbon, but I needed an excuse to depart. I felt weary, not physically, but emotionally.
Too many revelations for one evening. Riv walked me to the door.
At the threshold, he awkwardly embraced me, the first time in many years. We truly want to mend things, he said quietly.
Give us a chance, okay?
I looked at my son, a grown man who had achieved success and built a life for himself without my assistance. Perhaps in another reality, we could have been closer. Perhaps if Beatrice were alive, things would have turned out differently. Time will tell, I replied, not wanting to make promises I was unsure I could keep.
I stepped out into the night, inhaling the fresh spring air. The Mercedes waited in the driveway, gleaming in the streetlights.
I got behind the wheel and started the engine, feeling a strange sense of relief. It was as if a burden I had been carrying for years had finally been lifted from my shoulders. On the way home, I reflected on the previous evening, on Riv and Thelma's reactions, on my own feelings. Perhaps I had been too harsh on them. Perhaps they were genuinely remorseful and desired to change. But something told me that their interest in reconciliation was directly linked to the disclosure of my financial standing. I parked the Mercedes near the Quill and Bishop office and went upstairs to return the keys. Elbon, as I expected, was still there, working on some documents. How did it go? He asked when he saw me. Interesting, I replied, sinking into a chair.
You were right.
My son was in shock. I briefly recounted the events of the evening. Elbon listened, nodding and smiling occasionally. So, what now? He asked when I finished. Are you going to attempt to repair your relationship with your son? I thought about it, looking out the window at the city lights. I do not know, maybe, but on my terms, not theirs. And what are your terms?
Honesty, respect, acceptance of my choice to life as it in fit.
Elbon nodded. Reasonable. But you understand that it will not be easy for them. They exist in a world where everything is measured by money and status. Then they will have to change. I shrugged. Or we will remain strangers, just as before.
Vi que en versta little more.
Then I changed into my regular clothes, which I had left at the office, and Elben drove me home. My old apartment greeted me with its usual quiet and coolness.
He walked into the bedroom without turning on the light and sat on the edge of the bed.
The photograph of Beatrice on the bedside table seemed to glow in the dark. I picked it up, staring at her familiar features. You would be proud of him, B, I whispered. Despite everything, he has succeeded. He has built a career and started a family. Perhaps not the one we envisioned for him, but his own. I put the photo back and lay down without undressing. Sleep did not come. Too many thoughts were swirling in my head, about the past, about the future, about the choices that shape our lives. Perhaps I really had been too stubborn all these years. Perhaps I should have told Riv the truth about the business sooner, given him a chance to know the real me. Or perhaps I was right to test whether he could love me regardless of my bank account. Now, there is no way to know how our relationship would have unfolded under different circumstances. All I can do is accept what is and decide what to do next.
I knew one thing.
I would no longer live my life looking back at other people's opinions or trying to live up to someone else's expectations. Too many years had been squandered on that. It was time to live for myself, following my own